So welcome to another From the Studio podcast, stories from the world of product design, innovation and more. I'm the podcast host, Nick Bramley. My co-host is Richard Hall, both from PDM International. And we're delighted to have a guest this morning, Damon Bonser. Damon is the CEO and founder of the British Design Fund. So without further ado, welcome to From the Studio podcast, Damon.
Hi Nick, how you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. Richard, you okay?
Yeah, good, thank you. Morning.
Excellent. Well, we've got a lot to get through, I think, Damon. You've had a very interesting career and we want to explore everything around product development, innovation, funding, etc. So why don't we crack on, shall we? Let's talk about your interesting career. I looked on your LinkedIn profile. You've done everything from sales development, filmmaking, product development, geographical market penetration, and product and innovation and funding. So just do you want to give us a bit of a sort of guided tour, I guess up to 2017 when you launched the fund?
Yeah.
How did you get to where you got to in 2017, Devon?
Right, so like the abridged version, I suppose. So kind of after, so full disclosure, I am not trained as a designer, but have had design companies. So that kind of partly explains the strange checkered nature of my career. But kind of when I finished studying, I was fairly certain that I didn't want to go into the corporate life, but that was about it. That's about as far as my planning went. So really, I kind of was kicking around ideas, and by chance, I ended up in the product space, and more than that, I ended up sort of involved in manufacturing out in the Far East, and sort of really trading products back and forth. And it wasn't planned, and I always joke with people now, we spend a lot of time at the fund kind of, obviously analysing plans, looking in detail at the next 3 years and looking at the marketplace, and I do sometimes joke and say, honestly, if you could have seen how I sort of set up my first couple of companies, you'd be horrified. My appetite for risk has changed rapidly since my early 20s. But no, if I go back to my 20s, kind of most of my time was spent out in China, figuring out the marketplace. And I ended up out there just because the idea I had for a product, for a business, fell into the kind of consumer product space, and China felt like the natural place to go. And my views have probably changed quite a bit over the last sort of 15-20 years, but at the time it felt right to get the for the type of product that I wanted to make and find. But it kind of pivoted. That business sort of pivoted into a bit of a sort of distribution business for a few years. So that really entailed me going around not as a product guy, going around trade shows and factories across China, really figuring it out, trying to find product and match it really to what retailers wanted, predominantly over in the UK. That business again then sort of evolved. It faced challenges. I mean, the big challenge, as we're sort of heading towards kind of 2006, 2007, a big challenge with that business model was that your margins were slim. You weren't really adding anything, right? You were kind of taking some pain away from buyers. You were pulling together collections of products. That's how the business built up. Your margins were pretty slim. Pretty much all of the control was out of your hands. Product development, you'd see trends, but you couldn't action it necessarily. And really, a couple of things came to into play at the same time, and probably the most significant was like the oncoming financial crash and the dollar to pound exchange rate just pretty much obliterating margins. So very quickly I sort of pivoted that business. I'd sort of been, it was becoming apparent anyway, because we were struggling to grow overseas because the products we were sort of sourcing weren't up. We didn't have any IP on them. So we sort of pivoted again on that business, and that's, I'd say that's where I really started to cut my teeth into product and product design and manufacturing and building up skill. Like we built up a big design team in the UK. We ended up with offices in the US for sales and marketing, and in Hong Kong to oversee the production. But everything we started to do from that point onwards, it was kind of driven by margin. Partly that, I thought I've got to build more margin into my business. I can really only do that if I own the IP or own the designs. So I need to build up a skill set around that, like a team around it. But also it allowed us to expand overseas. So it actually worked. It was a bit of a stroke of genius, and also, probably a stroke of luck as well. It's my hand was forced, and things came into play as they often do with these sort of these journeys. And we ended up not being exposed, hugely to shifts in currencies, because we built up very quickly overseas sort of sales activity. And really that, so that I'd say, like, broad, like if we were sort of rounding it into two halves of my kind of career today, I guess that half I think it was my kind of Chinese manufacturing kind of baptism of fire, just honestly learning it on the fly. But you know, if you can take the knocks, it's not a bad way to learn, but it can be a bit costly, and it can take its toll on your health at times. But we got through it, and it was really, when I sold that business, that last kind of manufacturing business, there's a few things changing in my life as well. Like I was starting a family as well, and I didn't want to be spending so much time overseas. So I sort of shifted then, and that's, I think, if you're looking at my LinkedIn profile, I see that there then becomes more kind of service focused businesses. So really, I took the skills that I'd learned from kind of give or take 10 years of launching launching brands into market, you know, doing all the private label stuff for retailers around the world. So always in consumer, and I kind of took that learning and then started helping brands launch predominantly in UK brands launching into market, pulling together the sales, design, marketing teams. So I did quite a bit of that, but really sort of spread, I suppose. My expertise grew in the kind of advisory space. So I guess it was less about me taking a position, like taking a risk on stock and having warehouses around the world and production, and actually then going to more, holding people's hands as they went through that journey, putting in some of the amazing people that I'd worked with over the years in place in those companies, and then helping those brands launch helping them kind of scale. And really that then is sort of like my second half, where it's been advisory, and it gradually led, all of these things. And I'm not like, people that are listening that kind of have exited a company, it's not unusual to you sort of spread your wings in a way, but you just have a go at everything, because it's like a reset button itself. And I wasn't quite sure where I'd settle. All I knew is I didn't want to necessarily spend so much time outside of the UK with a young family kind of coming through. But I didn't know necessarily where I settled. I had this odd set of skills, but it naturally started to pull me, like you get pulled in certain ways. And Richard, I'm sure we can talk about how you bumped into me, but one of the things that pulled me was how I sort of met Richard, at Design Council and things like that. And all these, these things kind of happen necessarily because of your kind of strange skill set, I suppose, and your experience.
They're a little bit accidental sometimes, aren't they? But, you find yourself in the right place at the right time, hopefully not the other way around. The other side of the equation is not as much fun, is it? But I'm just conscious of exploring a little bit more about kind of when the funding started in terms of 2017. You've got a broad set of skills. You became advisory, consultative, and obviously you understood sort of design and manufacture and distribution and all that kind of thing. Was it a natural thing to look at sort of the British Design Fund, and what was the thinking behind it when you started it? Really, was what was the ambition for it?
Yeah, so I'd say, was it a natural? For me, it felt very natural. I think from outsiders, and certainly some of our investors looking, it felt like a very, very unusual jump to go from, kind of product and design entrepreneur to effectively private equity and venture, and running funds. So it was quite, I think from the outside, it looks like a strange shift in a way, but internally, like it felt completely natural. I was, and I was kind of working more and more with startups in the UK in early stage product, kind of mentoring, just giving them a bit of advice through places like Design Council and things like that. And it became fairly obvious that these startups were pretty limited in where they could go for expertise, like the real commercial sharp end of it, where it's like, look, this is how you're going to open up this territory. This is how you're going to get this through to market. This is some of the horrible stuff that's probably going to happen in the first sort of 2 years of you trying to get this product out. But also where they go for funding. All I was seeing all the time was kind of crowdfunding, which is great. It's amazing for marketing. It's great for offsetting some of that upfront capital, but doesn't give you the expertise. And then really the funds, everything was all about software, pure tech startups. So that's kind of so that's where it came. And it was whilst I was at the Design Council just doing a bit of mentoring with them that it all started to click into place, because there was a program called Spark, which was, put a little bit of money into very, very early stage sort of inventors, let's call them, and help them understand the market, get the product designed a bit better, or further develop the design. And it just like the kind of penny dropped. Nick, you said there's these fortuitous moments, and it's kind of, I think my brain was ready for it. I was ready for a challenge. I hadn't quite found it with all the consulting and advisory stuff. I wasn't fully ticking the box, and then it just, it became very apparent that there was a big funding and kind of expertise gap for these early stage product businesses, product and design businesses in the UK, and that kind of, but then it was, boy, did we have some work after that, because we're not we weren't the team that came together around it, the founders, none of us were private equity. We were all product guys, design guys, creatives. So it was, it all started again, lots of learning, which is how I like it.
4.5 years down the line then, sort of since launch 2017, is it in a place where it feels like it was destined to get to? Does it feel like a funding body rather than people who are advisors and consultants? What's the mix as it stands at the moment?
Yeah, so it has. So we've done what we set out to do. Like we said right at the start of this, we said, look, we aren't a bunch of guys from like Goldman's or something, right? We're not going to, the market's very unlikely to let us wander in and open up a sort of 20-30 million quid fund or upwards. So we said, what we've got to do, first of all, we've got to validate that, and very much like a design approach, right? We were kind of coming at this from a user point of view. We're saying, well, all of these product design startups are really struggling. That's our hypothesis. We think that's the case. And all of the kind of British Design Fund was modeled around their kind of needs. But we didn't know until you get it off the ground. You don't know how sort of scalable it is and how much interest there is. So we sort of said, right, let's try and get 3 modest sized funds off the ground and well deployed, and show some traction of what we can do when we really roll up the sleeves and help these companies. And that's kind of where we are today. So it's taken us, we lost a year really with COVID on one of the funds, but we're up to our 3rd fund. We're just starting to deploy that now, and so we've kind of, we feel we definitely, beyond a doubt, kind of validated the need for this kind of funding, and it will go on. We'll keep doing, so what we've built, we'll keep doing. The problem that we're solving for these early stage businesses in the UK, but we're looking at kind of internationalizing this now, like sort of replicating what we've done. It's definitely needed. Like, we're inundated with applications, and it's really interesting. A lot of the people that come and talk to us, they kind of say, we'd have launched 2-3 years ago if only we'd known you'd exist. They really, so we're happy with that. And now the sort of, I guess, the next sort of growth, the next growth stage for us, we'll never forget why we started the fund, which is this is our most compelling reason to exist, is this early stage funding. But we need to now start to scale up and build up larger funds, and allow us to do follow-on, allow us to engage with certain design companies that actually have already taken on a bit of money, though it's slightly different scale, but still early stage, but maybe they're kind of halfway on to a Series A or something.
Okay. So Richard, obviously you and Damon go back a little while, and you well networked, so you come across each other across various sort of aspects of the business landscape. Where did you first encounter each other, and what was the sort of thinking behind, oh, this guy's worth having on my radar?
Yeah, so it was a meeting at the Design Council. They had a program called Spark, which was a very small fund for inventors stroke designers that had a good idea but needed help in terms of the next stage. When I met Damon, I was really impressed of his level of experience in terms of working in China, product development, working at the sharp end of things, because I think anybody can have an idea, but to actually go through that journey of design for manufacture and regulatory and compliance and actually making things happen, you've got to have a real certain skill set. And that's kind of where we met, and I think we'll probably talk about this later, but there's lots of people that think that developing and manufacturing a product is easy, but there's this hidden thing in the valley of death where people go through this journey, and there's so many things that people don't anticipate. So the thing I liked about Damon is he's seen it and done it. And I think that, I left school at 16 and started my career on the tools in manufacturing as well. And I think there are so few people out there that have got that skill set, which is why I was really impressed with Damon.
Excellent. Well, I mean, to be fair, the journey leads you to wherever you end up, doesn't it, really? And as we've already explored with Damon, I don't think it was particularly that well planned. I quite like the idea when we explore about investor readiness that, your planning in the early days wasn't necessarily your strongest suit, Damon, and reacting to that. So just going back to you, Damon, obviously on a personal level, design and innovation seems really important to you. Let's explore that. You're a product guy rather than an app and a software guy, and why is product development important to
you? So I think, so I'm not like a Luddite, and many of the companies you invest in have got, there's a good chunk of tech in them. But yeah, my forte is product. That's what I kind of live and breathe. And and personally, and it's not unusual why I sort of set up the fund, because it is I do feel sort of strongly about this. But for me, sort of having good design within product is important. It's important to me because, like the world is, let's be honest, right? The world's in crisis, right? We're, and we've got to kind of be honest about the role that manufacturing and overconsumption plays in that. So I suppose if I bring that together, I sort of look at it and think, well, if we're going to put more product out there in the hands of users, let's like make sure that it's well designed, it's fit for purpose, it does what it's supposed to do, and there's a real reason it should exist, and that we can comfortably kind of go to sleep at night and say, do you know what, that has been designed as consciously as we can, considering like the alternative materials, looking at the design, not over engineering anything, and it's driven by a genuine user need. There is a lot of stuff. I mean, and again, what we do now, we do a huge amount of industrial product, more so than consumer. But I'm not here to kind of beat up consumer product, because we do back consumer products, and that is my background. But if you go down if you can find a typical high street that's still in existence, and you walk down it, I mean, I struggle to spend money in. You go into stores and there's so much poorly executed product. There's so much product that's not been led by design, and it's not. And obviously, when you pick some products up, you notice it, right? It's the thing is that you don't really notice good design sometimes, but you really notice when it's poorly done. And you pick up some products and it just feels wrong. It's not been executed well. But even more than that, you sort of, even if you don't get to pick it up and use it, you just look at it and you think, I can't rationalize why does this product exist, and it's surrounded by marketing gimmicks to convince me of its reason on this planet. And so for me, that is a bugbear, and I think that really feeds into what we do at the fund, and how I engage with product in my sort of personal life. It's got to be purpose led. There's got to be a reason for me to do this.
There are so many products out there, you wonder, how they got through the journey, don't you? Because someone somewhere must have had the thought process that says, this doesn't actually solve a problem. It's actually, there's no problem that exists that this is solving. And it's actually, from a design point of view, a complete waste of effort and energy. Richard, design and innovation, obviously given PDM International, it's in your DNA, Blackpool Rock, isn't it, really? What's your view on the same sort of approach with product design that Damon's outlined?
I think there's a misconception about what design actually is, first and foremost. I think there's something called user-centered design or human-centered design, which has always been there, but people have never really realized what it is. So it's kind of anticipating people's behavior, and then that dictates what the actual product solution is going to be. So whether it's a consumer product or a medical device, I think there are lots of people that don't go through a strategic journey to get to that place. There are lots of people that make huge assumptions, and there are people that just don't follow things through. So I think usability is really important. The big aspect of this is that you only really get one chance to launch a product. You don't really get a chance to redesign something. And I think the process of good design is that you pick up a product or use a product, and you naturally understand how to use it and to how it functions, and that's a byproduct of somebody who's done some really good thinking behind it. And I think because of that, people don't realize how much work goes into it.
That's fair. I mean, some of the stuff that you and I have discussed and seen through the studio, you sort of think it needs to be focus grouped, it needs to be looked at, it needs to be considered from a user perspective, and when they are, they stand out from those that haven't, I guess. Going back to you, Damon, we'll talk about investor readiness. Just interestingly, on the basis of where your starting point was about sort of random and haphazard, and you didn't really have a plan and fell into it. But I guess if you're funding somebody, they have to have an investor readiness approach. What's your view on that? What would you advise an entrepreneur or someone with a new product or idea? How do they get themselves ready for investor input? What are the things that they must do, and what are the things that you see that you think don't repeat that?
Yeah, I mean, kind of relating a little bit back to your previous question, it's kind of, I would say, make sure there's a market and a need for this. You're not designing for design's sake because you'd love to launch a product business. You're driven by some compelling market force, like some need that's not currently being satisfied. That is, I suppose that's probably the most important, and it is so difficult to do. And then other things start clicking in, like make sure, where you're pricing it, it kind of reinforces that it's still at that price, and the problem you're solving, it's still something that's very important to get through. And that's probably one of the hardest things. And that's almost, as an investor, that plus the people and the IP is kind of what you're really buying into. But I'd say there's some, and there are different businesses also, I should mention, not every type of so not every product business is suitable for venture money. Some of it will scale in a different way. Some of it has smaller markets and may not attract that, may attract a different type of investor. So maybe an angel investor with experience, not necessarily a fund that's got targeted returns that they've got to aim for. So there's always that question as well. So think about who you're going after, and obviously an angel needs far less sort of investor readiness than if you go to an institution like a fund. But generally speaking, I can kind of talk from the design fund's point of view. We would expect, well, actually, we've got certain criteria about the stage of product development that's not relevant here. But generally speaking, I would say make sure there's a market. Make sure you've done everything you can at that really early stage of your kind of ideation, the ideation part of your business. Like, do as much work as you can to understand the consumer, the market, like whether it's just you think there's a need for it, but does it actually exist? So without giving anything away, try and talk to those users, talk to some of those routes to market if that is possible. Talk to some of those people that will exist in your channels and just sound them out. Get an idea of how big that market is, because you're about to put a huge amount of your own time in, and you don't necessarily want to find out this is a really, really niche market that probably isn't going to sort of be able to pay you a salary. But I'd say really understand that market, because it's so cheap to pivot at that early stage. If you do find out, oh, do you know what, there is something out there that's pretty much doing what I do, as hard as it is to swallow that, I've got to accept that actually, do you know what, this particular idea is not going to fly. It's good to figure that out before you talk to investors, and it's good before you put too much of your own time and other people's and your own money into it. So that's a big one, I'd say, like that. And I sort of, it's one of those ones that no one can convince me that they haven't had time to do it properly, because it's fair enough, some people have different budgets. They can have insight agencies, like, God, we'd love to have all those guys, be able to just use them all the time, but if you don't, you can still do a lot of work on your own, going out researching it. There's kind of no excuse for it. And we do see quite a few that come through, and you look at it and think, I know there's stuff out there that's doing what they're saying. So that for me is a biggie. But obviously, for the other side of things for investor readiness is start to sort of, you have to at some point engage with a spreadsheet of some sort, but start to map out kind of what you think the next few years are going to look like. And it is all guesswork. And again, I'd say, it's not about really getting the right answer. It's about documenting your assumptions, which should become more and more credible the more research you do at that early stage. And again, I'd reiterate, it's not about getting it right or wrong. Like the things you put into your sort of business plans, your spreadsheets, but put assumptions in there. Have a best guess at what you think the next few years might look like. Fair enough, you might get the cash flow wrong. That's not a problem as such for an investor. It's kind of part of the value you expect to get from them, is for them to look over and say, do you know what, actually, you've kind of forgotten about the fact that this channel is going to need 90-day payment terms. Don't worry, that's a cash flow issue. We'll have a look at that. But again, another kind of, for me, unforgivable sort of thing to do when you go into an investor is to not have that, is to not or maybe they've just they've not really thought it through or put assumptions in. They've just said, well, the minimum order is 5,000, so let's just say we do 5,000, and I'll put one number in like November of their financial year. And it's really difficult for an investor, because you can't have a sensible conversation. Like, all you can do is kind of criticize them and say, look, you haven't really thought this through. Whereas what I love is if someone comes to me and they say, look, we think year 2 we might be able to internationalize, but year 1 we don't quite yet know exactly how we're going to do it, but it's going to be direct to consumer. We might use a bit of Amazon, or if it's a B2B, maybe we've got to engage with these kind of distributors or these these partners to get this product through to market. We've had a couple of conversations. We think this is this is our best guess at what they might buy, because we spent a few months looking at the marketplace. And at least in that situation, as an investor, you can sit down, you can look at it and say, do you know what, you've got some assumptions. We might completely disagree with them, but you've got like you can have a sensible conversation. So things like that.
You're providing the reality check on those assumptions, I guess, at that stage, aren't you? But if they haven't made any assumptions, there's nothing to reality check against, is there? So
no, and again, I'd say there's no reason not to do. Like, I struggle to think. I struggle to come up with the reason of why you can't. There might be completely wrong assumptions, but there's no reason you can't kind of just make a guess and say, I don't know, like you're launching a new type of hairbrush. You go, right, well, okay, we think maybe Amazon, then Boots in the UK, and there's this many stores, and you kind of, we might look at it and say, okay, well, look, probably you're not going to get into that many Boots stores in year 1 or 2 or not even get into Boots in the first few years. But at least you've started to think, and it shows to an investor that you're thinking commercially about this. You're thinking not just about the kind of the cost side of your business. You're thinking about how you're going to generate some sales, how you're going to get it out there. But yeah, so that's probably my, I could bang on all day
some great stuff in there, Damon. To be fair, our audience will be sort of hopefully intrigued enough, and those who were going to wing it and now not probably going to go away and open a spreadsheet. So at least that's great advice. From a product development side of things, Richard, on the investor readiness, what level and what stage you think engaging somebody like PDM International, looking at the sort of whole, it's designed for manufacture, isn't it? It's not just design, it's designed for manufacture. Where do you get to help people get to investor readiness, do you reckon? Where's the best place that you can take them?
I think the best place is to look at technology readiness levels from a 0 to a 9, a 0 being a blue sky idea and a 9 being a fully production ready product. Proof of concept is probably a good spot. So a technology readiness level of 2 or 3, which means that you've had the idea, the entrepreneur has actually committed to some budget to explore this in a lot more detail and to have a working prototype, for example. And by doing that, it enables the entrepreneur to get a feeling of how difficult the journey might be. It will test their assumptions in terms of, whether it will work or not. And then that's usually the first stages of talking to investors, because the investors will want to know, how much money do you need? Where are you with your intellectual property, and how big is the market? They're the 3 fundamentals. And if you cannot convey that in real detail, you're going to go back to kind of square one. And I think it's all about being realistic as well. So within a journey, obviously the trigger point is the actual product or the innovation having a place in the market. So once you've got to that proof of concept, it's now about, kind of scalability. I think a lot of people can make those assumptions, and they can kind of be in a dangerous place. So it's having that realism, really. I think entrepreneurs being self-critical, because if they're not self-critical, then you can bet your bottom dollar that an investor will be asking those hard questions. And I think it's just about being realistic and, not being too optimistic about things. So that's kind of, proof of concept is normally the good first base that you'd need to get to. And ideally, if you've got a focus group that you can talk to validate it, in other words, you've got a third party that is saying, yeah, this is a useful product and I would actually use it. They're the kind of early stages that you'd need to get to.
Couple of things there, though. The focus group needs to be independent. It doesn't need to be your other half and your best friends, does it? Because that's not always going to get the independent viewpoint. And the second thing you mentioned there, Richard, was about sort of in terms of the validation process for an entrepreneur. sometimes, the characteristics, I'm not going to get into psychology, but the characteristics of an entrepreneur are sort of, let's go, we're going to do this, full on, and yet the rigor required might be challenging. So I would imagine, Damon, you've probably had some conversation with entrepreneurs who it's the first time they've been challenged, and they probably don't like that process really in some respects.
Yeah, and actually, and also like point Richard made, it's really important, is it's that kind of blinkering that a lot of sort of founders have, if it's their first go at it, like they almost, like, they intentionally close down their vision, right? They just don't want to acknowledge what is going on in the marketplace, and it's so dangerous. So like the sort of TRL, the sort of 3-4, but if you've had a bit about a third party input, you can't deny it anymore. It's kind of, you will know if really there's something else out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a challenge. But like on the personality side of things, an entrepreneur should be determined and persistent, but equally, you have to accept that there's got to be a commercial, like, this has got to be commercially viable, and if not, that's fine. Like, channel that persistence and that determination into pivoting into something else. Like, don't lose that hunger, but also don't just shake the dice once and think you're going to get it right first time.
Just to follow on from that, and I'll ask Damon, then I'll come back to Richard on the same point, because I think it's important with who you choose to work with, Richard, but also who you might choose to fund, Damon. How important are the characteristics of the team that's going to be involved, or the person or people, and how important is the culture of that proposed business, the shape and the growth and what it's going to look like in a year, 2 years time? How much do you look at the people side, the culture side, as well as sort of the product and readiness for market?
Yeah, so I'd say it's absolutely vital, the people piece, and I'd say everything before that. And the analogy I use is kind of thinking about sending a job application or sending your CV in for a job, and there's like 100 applicants, right? You don't expect the decision maker they're not making positive decisions through the 100, right? They're quickly getting rid of them. So I'd say almost everything up until the kind of the people, and really delving into that team and looking at that kind of like the attractiveness of market and the insights the team have got into that marketplace. Everything until then, we're basically getting rid of people. It's not like positive decisions. We're not necessarily saying, oh, let's keep them in. We're actually saying, let's get rid of them. So it's almost we're disqualifying all the way up until you get it down to kind of, maybe, I don't know, a pitch day for us, we'll see maybe 6, probably, we wouldn't really ever see more than 6, because you kind of can't give them the time they need. So when it gets down to that last 6 pitching, we've already got rid of the negatives. Now it suddenly shifts around to being, right, it's the people. We're convinced, we'll have done early stage due diligence, and we know what the marketplace looks like. That's part of the selection process. But right, when it comes to the actual decision time, it's so much of it is people. It's difficult, because you've got a limited amount of time, say an investment committee, a limited amount of time to get a sense of someone. But you do get, there's so many that I've seen that you look at it, it's not the product and it's not necessarily the market, it's the person. Like, this just isn't going to work.
Yeah. Richard, same question to you, from somebody that you choose to work with, or maybe discount as a potential client. Is it the people, the culture, that's more important than the product, or where does it sit?
Yeah, same answer as Damon. I think once the product is right and the product has got efficacy, then it's about the people. The problem is that people think that their innovation will make it. So there almost needs to be, once the product's in place and it's got legs, then it's all about the people, tenacity. And so, I'd say over the last 16 years of innovations we've worked on, it's always good to work with an entrepreneur or a company that's got real motivation, and maybe, dare I say it, a mediocre kind of design, as opposed to somebody that's got a real knockout innovation, but they just don't have the experience or wherewithal to actually get it through. Because the reality is that it will turn on its head from being the actual product to that journey. And you need to have a person that's got that drive and motivation, because there will be so many barriers that they'll need to overcome. So I think, an entrepreneur's got to be receptive to change, and they've got to be receptive to being positively criticized and taking those knocks on the chin. The worst you know, people that won't make it are those people that have got a group think. So you get a group of people that have the same thought process and make the same decisions, or those that are not receptive to change. And you can almost, you know, I can almost, after 16 years, almost spot them within 30-second conversation. I'll know whether that person is suitable to kind of work with. And with what we do, because it is a long journey, and when we are developing products, it can be quite abstract at the very start, because we are selling our services, but we're not actually, you know, we can't provide a solution until the end of a budget and end of a project. So there's lots of trust needs to be involved with a startup, you know, right from the outset. If you've not got the trust, because we can't guarantee we're going to get a solution, and we can't guarantee what's going to happen. All we know is we've got loads of years of experience and we've got a strategy in place. So fundamentally, trust is there as well. And, you know, the other aspect is you'll get some aspects that some entrepreneurs that want to leapfrog fundamental aspects, but you can't do that. You have to really start from zero. In some cases, with some clients, we'll go back, we'll kind of reverse backwards a little bit, because we can't necessarily validate their assumptions. So there's a lot of
but they have to be open to that reversing, don't they? Otherwise, there is no point working with somebody like yourself and then going to an investor who's going to say, well, you're not ready and you need to take on board the feedback. So that's really, really valuable advice. You know, don't put all your eggs in the product and innovation basket. Look at what your own skill sets and your own ambitions and the team around you are, etc. So that's great. I'm going to pick up on a quote, David, on your LinkedIn profile, which I really like. And I like it because, well, you called the British Design Fund, and you said here, the aim is to leverage the UK's position as the largest design industry in Europe in order to invest in innovative early stage product design based businesses. So I guess we're all rightly proud of where the UK sits in that sort of position in the design industry. Why is that? Why is the UK particularly effective at creating, I guess, entrepreneurs and people coming off the production? Is it universities, colleges? Is it culture? Why are we that country, or that collection of countries?
Yeah, I'd say, I suspect it's probably more culture. It's our heritage, and it's kind of in our blood to nurture and empower innovation and challenging thinking. You know, we are a sort of global center of excellence for that. And then you've got all the kind of stakeholders that sit around it that just reinforce that. So, you know, like the amazing colleges, universities, you know, the kind of, you know, and even for product, which is, you know, it concerns me that it's becoming, you know, I think the UK is sort of losing sight slightly of this. You know, a lot of our talent goes overseas, but we are producing lots of talent that comes out of these colleges, these universities, these schools. There are places to incubate them. I think there could be a lot more, but there are places, and it is in our heritage. But I think, and also we do attract, and I think it's kind of like, why would you say, why is the UK such a sort of vibrant place for, say, pop culture and for music and things like that? And it's in our blood to be like that, and we attract an international audience, and we have talent that comes in to be amongst it and to feed off it. But the thing I worry about is I think, you know, I think there's kind of, so I think we're good at kind of giving birth to these things, but they just drift off. They kind of go elsewhere, and part of that is, and part of that relates actually back to why we started the BDF. Is part of this just not that network to take them through, to commercialize them, to understand it. We've kind of forgotten that, you know, fair enough, we might not be sort of, you know, a manufacturing nation right now. Bits are coming back, but right now, okay, we have to accept that. But we are a nation that's like really strong at innovating, really strong at design. We're so creative, and it all feeds off each other. You know, it's like a creeping moss. You know, you can't stop it. It's coming through the windows. You know, it kind of goes everywhere. but it's a real shame when it comes to then saying, right, let's make some money out of it. It's almost like a dirty word, and people start going to the States, or they go, you know, it's kind of, it seems to then, it's like sand going through our hands, and that's what I really hope, kind of, you know, in 10, 20 years time, I'll be really happy if the one little thing that BDF can do, you know, is kind of, it's start to change that tide a bit and keep some of them here and go, look, it's okay, you know, we'll try and manufacture here where possible, but we just want to retain the talent, retain the IP, keep it here, because it's so, you know, like you're as good as your team, right? And it's sort of and those people are here. But it does feel like they get to a certain point in their careers and they sort of start to jump on planes. So
okay, well, we're not really allowed to do that very often at the moment, are we? So maybe that might retain people a little bit more. Richard, same question, I guess, to you. You know, the landscape of entrepreneur UK, really. You know, what's your view on why we do see a constant flow of entrepreneurs, ideas, innovation, and how does that fit from your end? Obviously, Damon's looking at funding. You're looking at kind of supporting ideas through the manufacturing, ready for manufacture commercialization process. What's your view on the landscape? Is it stronger than it was when you started? That kind of thing.
I think that there are more individuals that are having a go at innovation because they can see, rightly or wrongly, that there is a possibility. So 15 years ago, you know, crowdfunding didn't really exist. So if you had a good idea, the usual format would be to go to the business angel network or institutionalized investors. I think that's turned itself on its head. So rightly or wrongly, things like Dragon's Den, you know, have given people the appetite that if you have an idea, you can actually make potentially some serious amounts of money out of it. I think that has potentially given a bias to a lot of people. I've certainly seen there's probably more individuals are interested in innovating than before, and I don't really know why that is. I think the responsibility is to make people aware that it actually isn't that easy to kind of make money from an innovation. I think that's where British Design Fund comes into this thing. It's got a responsibility to talk to those startups, to give them that kind of feedback and information. The kind of slight worry for me is that there's a big move towards digital products and digital solutions, and I think that if we don't have things like BDF, that skill set of creatives and entrepreneurs and innovators is going to go somewhere else. There will always be a need for physical products. So at the moment, there's lots of movement in different, types of tech organizations, apps, for example. But there will always be a need for a physical product somewhere along the way.
Okay. Conscious of time, it's flown by this, guys, by the way. Really, really interesting, and I'm sure our audience will appreciate insights and conversations around this all day. But Damon, I'm going to ask you a final question. What's next for the British Design Fund? Where are you seeing it going? You mentioned you're launching the third fund, or just launched a third fund. How many businesses are you looking to support over the next 18 months or so? What's the plan?
Yeah, so we've got a third fund that we're just starting to deploy at the moment, and within that we'll probably see about seven businesses that we'll invest in. So kind of putting in 150,000 ideally into each one. And we've got a good amount of traction already. So we've got sort of about 4 or 5 coming through, and so we'd expect to see another 3 or 4 in the next sort of 3-4 months that we invest in from that fund. But we're kind of, the journey BDF's going on now is we're aware we need a follow-on fund. We need to start deploying larger amounts. Like those companies that we've put early investments into need further funding, before they kind of really are flying. So for us, larger funds, but also more of the same of what we're doing, because it is nice, as much as we've had COVID come along, that's kind of presented challenges for like Richard, I'm sure the same for you, like for people dealing with physical product and kind of getting that in the hands of people. It makes actually quite difficult to assess how much stuff is just in designers' heads, and they've actually gone out on the streets and tested it all out. But thankfully we are coming out of that phase now, and we're seeing so many applications coming in. That sort of, I'd say it really picked up as we sort of headed towards summer. I think people have kind of put COVID in the relevant box. It's still obviously a thing, you can't ignore it, but we've got to crack on, and so we're seeing a lot around there. So we'll get another fund. So I'd say anyone that's interested in having a conversation with us, get applications in. You can go to our website. We will always have a fund available for those early stage ones, and we hope within the next 6 months that we can start doing a bit more follow on to kind of support them as they continue to grow.
Excellent. No pressure on those pitching days then at all. You've only got seven spots at the table, so that's good. Well, listen, guys, as I say, that's absolutely flown. This has been from the studio, our podcast from PDM International. Our details are on the holding screen for those who are watching it on video. We're based in Thirsk in North Yorkshire. We're based in Leeds, obviously in West Yorkshire, and our contact details are there. All that remains for me to say is thanks, Damon, for being a fantastic guest. Thanks, Richard, for being a great co-host, and we'll hopefully see you all again very soon.
Thank you.